The story of the Mitford sisters begins quietly, in the English countryside, within a family that at first seemed no different from other aristocratic households. They were privileged, eccentric, and bound by tradition. Yet from this single family came 6 daughters who would shake the world. One sister dined with Hitler, another married the leader of British fascism, and a third eloped with Winston Churchill's nephew to fight in the Spanish Civil War. Some wrote best-selling novels, others courted scandal, and one even informed on her own family to the authorities. The Mitford sisters did not simply witness the upheavals of the 20th century, they embodied them. Fascism and communism, glamour and disgrace, love and betrayal, the contradictions of the age played out through their lives. Sydney Bowles was the daughter of a publishing family. She grew up witty, resourceful, and intelligent, the grounding presence of her future household. Her husband, David Freeman Mitford, later Lord Redesdale, could not have been more different. Gruff and temperamental, he carried the scars of the Boer War and the First World War, physically damaged, half-deaf, and deeply suspicious of change. Their marriage brought together warmth and thunder. Sydney kept the household running, while David stormed through it with rages that were sometimes comic and sometimes terrifying. Together, they created an environment of privilege, neglect, and peculiar freedoms, the fertile soil out of which 6 extraordinary daughters would grow. The children arrive. The first child, Nancy, was born in 1904. From the start, she showed a sharp wit and a rebellious spirit. Where her father demanded obedience, she mocked him. Where her mother encouraged duty, Nancy laughed at convention. She was followed by Pamela, the quiet sister, practical and stubborn, more at home with animals than people. Then came Diana, whose beauty dazzled everyone who met her. Unlike Nancy's satire or Pamela's rural calm, Diana's gift was glamour, a quality that would both elevate and destroy her. The fourth sister, Unity Valkyrie, stood out for her awkwardness and intensity. From childhood, she seemed marked for obsession, drawn to causes larger than herself. Next was Jessica, known as Decca. Fierce and independent, she would one day become the ideological opposite of Unity, sister against sister, communism against fascism. And finally, Deborah, the youngest. She was cheerful, adaptable, and resilient. Though less dramatic than her older sisters, she would outlast them all, rising to become the beloved Duchess of Devonshire. Each girl was distinct. Together, they would form a family unlike any other. The sisters' early years were spent at Asthall Manor, a crooked Jacobean house in Oxfordshire. Their childhood was anything but orderly. With little supervision, they roamed the countryside, invented games, and created their own secret world. The centerpiece of that world was the Society of Hens, a private club where gossip, mock trials, and coded languages reigned. Punishments were imaginative and often cruel, but the society bound them together. It was, in many ways, a rehearsal for adulthood. Nancy honed her wit, Diana practiced her charm, Unity embraced her eccentricity, and Jessica sharpened her rebellion. In 1926, the family moved to Swinbrook House, a stark and lonely stone mansion. Its echoing hallways and drafty rooms unsettled the sisters, who declared it haunted. Yet it was here that they came of age. Nancy buried herself in books, Diana began attracting society's attention, Unity's obsessions deepened, and Jessica began plotting escape. Impact of the First World War. The First World War carved itself into the heart of the Mitford household long before the sisters came of age. David Mitford, their father, had gone to battle filled with the romantic illusions of empire. He returned broken, half-deaf from shell fire, his lungs scarred, his spirit hardened. The war stripped him of youthful optimism and left him instead with a quick temper, a fierce distrust of foreigners, and a longing for an England that no longer existed. When David inherited the title of Lord Redesdale, the family rose formally into the aristocracy. But theirs was not a life of boundless wealth. The estate was grand in name more than in comfort, and money was often tight. The girls grew up in a strange mixture of privilege and parsimony, always conscious of their lineage, yet forever reminded of their financial limits. For the Mitford children, the war itself was little more than distant thunder in their earliest years. But its aftermath, unemployment, political unrest, the collapse of old certainties, was the air they breathed. The great disillusionment of post-war Britain seeped into their lives, shaping the restless energy and radical choices that would one day define them. Nancy, early satire and society life. As the eldest, Nancy Mitford was the first to be thrust into the rituals of upper-class life. Presented at court, paraded at dances, and expected to marry advantageously, she fulfilled the outward duties of a debutante. Yet even as she smiled and curtsied, she was taking notes. Nancy had a gift for observation, razor-sharp, merciless, and wickedly funny. To her, the endless parade of suitors, social climbers, and idle aristocrats was not romance, but material. Where others saw glamour, Nancy saw absurdity. Her early marriage to Peter Rodd, charming but unreliable, soon faltered, leaving her disillusioned but inspired. She turned to writing, pouring her wit and disappointment into her first novels. By 1935, with Wigs on the Green, Nancy crossed a line. The book satirized not just the frivolities of society, but the dangerous new politics seeping into Britain. She mocked her sister's flirtations with fascism and laid bare the ludicrousness of authoritarian posturing. Readers laughed, critics praised her, but at home, the backlash was ferocious. From then on, Nancy's pen would be her weapon. She had found her power, not on the dance floor, but on the page. Diana and fascism. If Nancy wielded words, Diana Mitford wielded beauty. She married young Brian Guinness, heir to the brewing fortune, fell under her spell, and together they dazzled London. Their salons drew the writers, artists, and aristocrats who defined the glittering interwar years. But Diana was restless. Wealth and admiration were not enough. She hungered for intensity, for conviction. She found it in Oswald Mosley, the charismatic leader of the British Union of Fascists. Their affair rocked society. For Diana to leave her husband and children was scandalous enough, to devote herself to a man openly modeling his politics on Mussolini was something far darker. In 1936, Diana sealed her allegiance in the most shocking of settings, Berlin. She and Mosley were married in the home of Joseph Goebbels. Their wedding guest list included Adolf Hitler himself. For Britain, it was a betrayal impossible to forgive. From that moment on, Diana was transformed in the public eye. No longer the society beauty, she became a pariah. To some, she was a misguided romantic. To many, she was a traitor. Unity and Hitler. While Diana pledged herself to Mosley, her younger sister Unity set her sights even higher, or lower, depending on one's view. Awkward in childhood, desperate for purpose, Unity reinvented herself as the embodiment of Hitler's ideal Aryan woman. Tall, blonde, and fanatical, she moved to Munich in 1933 with a singular mission, to meet Adolf Hitler. And she succeeded. By sheer persistence, haunting his favorite café until he noticed her, Unity forced her way into his orbit. To the astonishment of her family, she became one of the Führer's favored companions. She attended his rallies, dined at his side, and declared her devotion openly. To her family, her obsession was alarming. To Hitler, it was politically useful. To Unity herself, it was love. But love turned to despair in 1939. When Britain declared war on Germany, Unity's loyalties collapsed under impossible weight. That September, she walked into Munich's English garden, raised a pistol to her head, and pulled the trigger. She survived, maimed, brain damaged, forever changed. Returned to England, she lived out her days as a dependent shadow of her former self, a living relic of fanaticism gone too far. Jessica, Decca, and communism. If Unity was the family's fascist, Jessica, known as Decca, was its communist. Where Unity painted swastikas on her walls, Jessica adorned hers with the red hammer and sickle. The two sisters shared a bedroom, separated not by space but by ideology, their nightly arguments foreshadowing the great global battle to come. In 1937, Jessica acted on her convictions. She eloped with Esmond Romilly, Winston Churchill's rebellious nephew. Together, they ran away to Spain, determined to fight in the Civil War on the Republican side. It was a romance of politics and passion, two aristocrats abandoning comfort to live in shabby hotels, under bombardment, side by side with soldiers and refugees. For Jessica, it was liberation. For her family, it was yet another scandal. Tragedy soon followed. In America, where they had fled to build a new life, Esmond enlisted with the Royal Canadian Air Force during the Second World War. In 1941, he was killed in action, leaving Jessica a widow at only 23. Yet Jessica endured. She remade herself as a writer and activist in the United States. Her exposés, From the American Way of Death to Investigative Journalism on Inequality, marked her as a fearless critic of power. Where Unity had been consumed by ideology, Jessica wielded hers as a weapon for justice. War and division. The outbreak of the Second World War fractured the Mitfords beyond repair. Sister turned against sister, loyalty against loyalty. Nancy, who despised fascism, could no longer remain silent. Quietly, she passed information to British intelligence about Diana's activities. To Nancy, it was a duty; to Diana, it was betrayal of the deepest kind. In 1940, Diana and Mosley were arrested and imprisoned under Defense Regulation 18B. The glamour of the 1930s was gone, replaced by cold stone walls and public disgrace. Nancy, meanwhile, continued her war efforts in her own way, through her writing, her connections, and her small acts of resistance. The rift was permanent. Diana never forgave Nancy. Unity, broken by her failed suicide, could not comprehend the conflict. Jessica, in America, dedicated herself to the opposite cause. The sisters, once bound by childhood games and secrets, now stood scattered across the ideological battlegrounds of the 20th century. Post-war years and divergent paths. When the guns fell silent and Europe began to rebuild, the Mitford sisters emerged into a new world. The choices they had made during the storm of war now defined the paths they would walk for the rest of their lives. Nancy, still estranged from Diana, reinvented herself in Paris. Heartbreak had left its scars, her marriage was long behind her, and the love she had most cherished ended in disappointment. But she turned sorrow into art. In France, she became a chronicler of wit and folly, her novels sparkling with satire, her essays dissecting society with elegance and precision. To her readers, she was not just a novelist but one of the sharpest social commentators of her generation. Diana, by contrast, remained unrepentant. She had endured prison, public disgrace, and the loss of nearly everything, but she never abandoned Oswald Mosley. Until his death, she stood at his side, their partnership defiant against the world's condemnation. To some, her loyalty was admirable. To many, it was damning. She lived her life in the shadow of choices she refused to disown. Unity's path was far shorter. The gunshot in Munich had ended her life long before death itself arrived. Brain damaged and dependent, she lived out her remaining years under her mother's care, fading slowly until her death in 1948 at only 33. Her tragedy became a cautionary tale, a life consumed by obsession. Jessica, across the Atlantic, thrived. She raised her children in America, building a life from the ashes of loss. Her journalism and books challenged corruption, exposed injustice, and advocated for civil rights. In contrast to Diana's unwavering fascism, Jessica's passion for social equality never dimmed. To her readers, she was a fearless radical; to her family, she was still Decca, the rebel who never looked back. Pamela, the quietest of them all, kept to the background. She withdrew to the countryside, living a private life far removed from politics and scandal. While her sisters filled headlines and history books, Pamela chose obscurity, her name mentioned only in passing, her life defined by simplicity. And then there was Deborah, Debo, the youngest, and in many ways the most surprising. Through her marriage to Andrew Cavendish, she became Duchess of Devonshire and mistress of Chatsworth House, one of England's grandest estates. At first, Chatsworth was a crumbling inheritance, its survival in doubt. But Deborah brought it back to life with energy, pragmatism, and wit. She turned it into a national treasure, a place where history and modernity met. In doing so, she transformed herself from shy youngest sister to one of the most beloved figures of her age. The sisters had once shared nurseries, bedrooms, and endless childhood quarrels. By the post-war years, their lives had scattered, across nations, across ideologies, across history itself. By the dawn of the 21st century, only Deborah remained. The girl once overshadowed by her glamorous sisters had outlived them all, transformed into a national treasure. With her sharp humor and practical charm, she became a beloved symbol of resilience. When she died in 2014, an era ended. The last living link to the Mitford saga was gone. 6 sisters. 6 destinies. Each scandalous, each unforgettable. Together, they refracted the turbulence of the 20th century, fascists and communists, satirists and activists, duchesses and dissidents. Theirs was not just a family story. It was the story of an age of extremes, of passion, of brilliance and ruin. And in the end, it is through the Mitfords, through their laughter, their quarrels, their loyalties and betrayals, that we glimpse the fractured soul of the century they helped to define.